Wharf Street still smelled like wet plywood and gin, a smell that seemed to outlive owners and signage and even fire. Tom Mallory stood behind new yellow tape in an old peacoat, wind off the Atlantic licking the collar as if weather could read a man's history, and wasn't impressed. Retirement had taught him how to watch without being seen, but Greyharbor had taught him first. Fog here had presence, the kind that held its ground at crosswalks and treated sirens like concerns for other neighborhoods. The Mariner had burned at dawn, according to the radio. By afternoon, the club was a charred rib cage, the sign a blackened underline over nothing. In 1983, the place could make a promise with neon alone lines around the corner, synth bleeding through brick, a floor that spun strangers into better versions of themselves for 3.5 minutes at a time. Now smoke threaded the light, and a front loader gnawed methodically at the east wall, while arson techs conferred in the universal stance of experts who know the next mistake will be photographed. "Back it out," the lieutenant called. The bucket bit, dragged, and brick surrendered in reluctant avalanches. Something held. Metal flashed a rectangle, waist-high, with welded seams and blistered green paint that had survived fashions and 1,000 spilled drinks. The operator killed the engine. Rain took the sudden silence personally, ticking on the steel like coins in a church plate. "Leave it for evidence," one tech said. "We open it clean." Mallory felt the tremor before he named it. Not dread. Recognition. Greyharbor returned things, sometimes precisely, sometimes as rumor. The city was a tide that learned human habits. It kept what you dropped until you learned how to ask for it back. In 1983, Lydia Crane had walked into the Mariner wearing a denim jacket with white piping and a braid that reached the small of her back. A bouncer swore she never made it to the alley. A barback swore she left in a red hatchback with a gull decal feathered at the corner of the rear window. Truth had put up a palm like a traffic cop, and the intersection froze. The case closed 3 years later on bad forensics and a witness who turned into a cautionary tale. Greyharbor did not clap for endings like that. It waited. Mallory watched the locker be lifted onto a pallet, shrink-wrapped the way the living are careful with the dead. Detectives would come. Not his word anymore. The absence of a shield didn't make him less or more. It made him honest. Without the badge, the watching felt like a vocation stripped of uniform. An old muscle in him flexed anyway, the one that knew how to ask doors to reconsider. When the crowd thinned and rain turned from event to condition, he walked uphill toward Crescent Hill, where roofs leaned into weather like conversation. The key stuck in his duplex lock, as it did every late October through March, a ritual he refused to correct because rituals are the last proof a man lives where he claims. Inside, quiet waited exactly where he'd left it. He put water on for tea, not because he wanted tea, but because kettles announce purpose. He opened the kitchen drawer where family houses keep forks. Paper lived there instead, manila jackets with tabs. He had labeled them in block letters back when he believed labels made the world behave. Lydia Crane, 1962. He laid the case on the table like a meal he'd promised himself he would finish. Photographs, notes softened by handling, a timeline he'd drawn like a ladder, hours, locations, witnesses with arrowed doubts. At the center rung, a blank the size of a night. Lydia in a curbside photo outside the Mariner. Denim piped white at the seams, chin lifted, mouth caught mid-laugh, a hand entering the frame from the left, holding a cigarette like a punctuation mark that never lands. A traffic camera still that shouldn't have existed, a blur of a red hatchback peeling left, gull decal a white curve at the window. The alley morning after, bleach turning the concrete into an alibi. He touched the corner of that last print until the paper warmed. Cold cases are about temperature as much as time. The phone rang, 4 rings is the compromise between arrogance and need. He answered on 4. Mallory, Detective Vera, arson. You left your name with one of my uniforms. I left a name, he said. Cards are for people with offices. We opened the locker, she said. Work and fans and radios braided her background, the sound profile of an evening shift. Did it right photo, video, glove changes, the whole wedding. Contents: women's denim jacket, initials LC stitched inside the right cuff thread looks homemade. 2 ticket stubs stamped Deck 31, 1983. 1 silver gull matchbook, a Polaroid sealed in a Ziploc labeled NYE 83, key ring with a single brass key, tip filed square. Tube of lipstick, long dead. Coin purse with 3 Harbor Line Ferry tokens. The Ferry hadn't used tokens since 1990. He could feel their weight, the cool, municipal certainty of minted time. Chain begins with me, Vieira said. Unofficially, the locker was welded into a service void nobody knew, which is not the same as nobody knowing. Greyharbor knows, he said. He hung up and let the house reclaim silence in increments. The tea had gone black in the cup. He pulled the timeline and added a line that wasn't a line yet. Locker east wall? Service void? Inside, weld for access. He'd always distrusted neatness. String on bulletin boards makes pretty lies. But pattern is a kind of gravity. Ignore it and you float away. He went back out because sitting becomes a lie after the 3rd minute. The ferry landing had been repurposed into a restaurant where sauces justified adjectives. A bronze plaque on the wall commemorated the last token at the turnstile July 17th, 1990. Greyharbor kept plaques for endings. It never marked the middle where everything went wrong. He touched the rusted chain on the old gate. A squared key had 100 uses. Coin-op lockers, jukeboxes, fuse boxes made by men who thought corners should warn you. Lydia's father had been a machinist. Mallory remembered that not because it solved anything, but because precision is a kind of heredity. He could see a garage light, a vise, a file rasping until a tip learned a new geometry. The speculation tasted like narrative dangerous, but the mouth remembers even bad flavors. Back home, he spread city plans across the table. The Mariner in 1983 had been a palimpsest. Chandlery, Candle Warehouse, finally Club. On the east side, a service corridor ran behind the stage, a coat room rectangle shaded in gray. Voids where ducts turned right angles into hiding places. If a welded locker slept behind the east wall, someone had time, access, and a door to lock behind them while sparks burned air. Staff or contractor. He wrote 2 short lists and forgave none of the names. Near midnight, the phone again. He answered on one because thinking you're not waiting is a kind of lie, too. Vera, we lifted 2 partials on the Polaroid sleeve. One is Nathan Hollis maintenance at the Mariner, 82 to 85. Old prints we had from an arrest. The other is yours, likely archive cross-contamination. Sorry. In the 80s, we stacked evidence like firewood, he said. Don't apologize for a decade. We digitized the Polaroid. Timestamp appears to read 12:41 a.m., John 1:84, if the camera wasn't drunk. Lower right, a woman turning away braid, white piping. Far background, in the bar mirror, a man looking toward the lens. Not startled. Just aware. Bracelet on left wrist, wider than a medical ID. Men who look into glass believe glass looks back, Mallory said. He knew the photographer. Or wanted to, Vera said. We'll run staff rosters and contractor permits. Also, the jacket monogram thread fluoresced. Home job. Pocket has trace of lipstick matching the dead tube. Meaning either authenticity, he said, or someone curated authenticity. Let's not build a conspiracy if a closet will do, she said. But he could hear her marking both columns. They met again under halogens at the site because some conversations required the theater of ruin. She handed him an enhanced copy. Confetti hung in air like a weather system. The mirror behind the bar caught a slice of crowd. In that slice, a man's head turned toward the photographer, earlobe nick visible, bracelet thick as a watchband. Faces gather meanings like lint. You have to be careful what you let stick. But Mallory recognized the general shape. A man who trusted that rooms belonged to him until corrected. You know him? I know his type, he said, which is either useful or a way to flatter my own past. She told him a name to visit. Nathan Hollis, family on Salmon. 3 years in state for B&I in the 90s. Clean since. Your old notes say he cried through the interview. He cried like a man who understands that wetness convinces people, Mallory said. His eyes stayed dry at the corners. That's where truth collects. Be careful, she said. Retired isn't civilian in the ways that matter to angry men. Angry men don't check status, he said. They check range. Morning uncreased itself over Greyharbor white sky. Gulls writing invisible alphabets no one had ever translated honestly. Mallory wrote 3 sentences about Lydia and crossed out the ones that turned her into memorial text. What stayed? Senior at Greyharbor College, accounting major who took dance to keep her spine honest. Part-time at Whittemore's pharmacy. Machinist father who taught square filings because corners need respect. Whittemore's still rang a bell that sounded pre-recorded. The clerk couldn't help, but her grandmother could. You can feel a name that never got to finish, the girl said. That was Greyharbor's thesis and excuse. It sent him to Salmon Court, where Hollis's aunt opened on a chain, judged his grammar, then let him sit. Nate doesn't live here, she said. He comes on Sundays and treats football like confession. She listened without interrupting while he described the locker inventory. She nodded at tokens and made a face at the lipstick brand. He didn't kill that girl. How do you know? Because he keeps every bad thing he didn't do, she said. Shows them off so you forgive the ones he did. He knew the back halls. He loved sparks and hated responsibility. That's not a welder. That's a spectator. Why'd he leave the Mariner? Because money got lost and management wanted a face. Because the ocean calls fools and saints with the same voice. And he thought he could tell the difference. She wiped her hands on her apron, as if conversation left residue. He's at the salvage yard on Industrial. Metal doesn't ask you who you were. The salvage yard was a museum of dents, cars stacked in careful disarray. Arcade cabinets retired in a row like old soldiers. The office door was open. A radio insisted men's opinions on ball flight mattered. Hollis recognized Mallory and didn't pretend otherwise. You retired or immortal? Neither took, Mallory said, and sat where men like them do their worst talking, in doorways where air can escape. This about the fire. The locker, Mallory said, and a picture that took 20 years to clear its throat. I never had keys to lockers, Hollis said. Management liked quarters. I pushed a broom, watched people perform sincerity to a backbeat. Your print is on the Polaroid sleeve, Mallory said. A fact, not a knife. Your print's on half the case file, Hollis said. What's your knife? Memory, Mallory said. Walk me through New Year's '83. Hollis leaned back until his chair remembered better days. Confetti in the mops. People kissing wrong people and telling themselves the calendar would fix it. A man asked if the East Corridor was clear, so he could bring up cases. Tall. Bracelet like a hospital band, but expensive. The kind you flash because jewelry is a language. Looked at me like he was checking my price. Was he staff? He walked like he owned the air, Hollis said. That's different than owning keys. Coin-op lockers? 2 rows. Quarter in, key out. East Corridor had kitchen access. an old fuse box we kept for the look of responsibility, and a mop closet door that would stick unless you meant it. You could hide a locker in the void behind the box if you liked secrets and had time. Who liked secrets? Assistant manager, maybe. The kind of man who checks mirrors to see if he's in focus. Evan Rusk, Mallory said without meaning to. The name tasted like old copper. Hollis watched him watching the name. "Tell him I forgot him 15 minutes after I met him," he said. "It'll hurt more than jail." On the way out, Mallory paused by the arcade carcasses. He touched a coin slot. The interior lip was squared to reject the wrong key. Metal can be a teacher if you show up humble. He imagined Lydia learning that lesson at a workbench, file rasping, her father saying corners are where you prove who you are. By late afternoon, the sky turned the color of old pennies, and the harbor reflected that lie happily. At his table, Mallory spread the enhanced Polaroid, the 1983 staff roster, a city electrical plan someone had slipped him in 80C7 when favors were still a currency he could manage. Lines connected. Coat room, service corridor, east wall void. He wrote Evan Rusk assistant manager terminated in 1986 for cash discrepancy. Bracelet? Medical ID? No record. He wrote D. Otter Calderer bracelets and crossed it out. Invention is different than inference. The pencil left a ghost anyway. Vera called with lab crumbs worth more than their size. Lipstick brand discontinued in 89. Shade, frosted plum. Trace on jacket pocket matches the tube's formula. The Polaroid mirror shows a wall clock hands match timestamp. Heat signatures and debris say the weld was from the inside. Knowledge, not accident, he said. Inside job, she said. Which can mean staff or hired hands. We're pulling contractors. Pull the ones whose permits began and ended on holidays, he said. Some men like to hide where celebration makes the day ugly for paperwork. She exhaled, and he could hear the smile she didn't permit her mouth. You miss this. I miss finishing, he said. The part where a thing stops screaming. When he hung up, the quiet returned, faithful as a dog that understands only one trick. The empty chair across from him held a curve that had once been a woman named Ellen. He said her name not for comfort, but for calibration. Names need exercise. He ate 2 bites of cold lo mein and threw the box away. Hunger in a widower's house runs on a different calendar. Coat on, street again, because thinking is a muscle that cramps indoors. Wharf Street glowed under halogens like a stage set that refused to respect daylight. He paced the tape with his hands behind his back, a museum habit to keep from touching the exhibits. At the 11th brick from the corner, a pale smear ran the east wall paint that had tried to hide its own change of mind. He pictured a man with a bracelet welding in a service void, while confetti fell on the other side of the wall and voices counted backward into a different year. He pictured a jacket folded by a hand that wouldn't have chosen frosted plum, a coin purse rattling with unspendable tokens, a squared key tucked away because someone liked problems solved with steel more than problems solved with talking. Back home, the bulletin board took another pin. He didn't use yarn. He liked pencil because pencil admits mistakes. The Polaroid sat at eye level. Beneath it he wrote, block letters. Who looks at cameras in a crowd? 3 answers. Men who think they own the room. Men who know the photographer. Men who are hiding in plain sight and need proof. On the map, he circled Salmon Court and Industrial Road. He drew a light line to a name he had avoided writing for a decade. Rusk. He had avoided it not because the man frightened him, but because the man bored him. Some predators confuse appetite with personality. The mirror in the Polaroid suggested otherwise. The man had remembered to perform himself for history. The next morning would be for permits, the dull gold of real work, and for the practical visiting of doors. Evan Rusk first, then the old electrician whose initials showed up in an inspection report from '82, then back to the Silver Gull's old manager if he could be found. Vieira would walk the official path, and he would keep the weather company. It was a division of labor they hadn't negotiated and couldn't write down. For now, he put the kettle on again. The house clicked the way houses do when temperature moves through their bones, small concessions to physics in the absence of conversation. He stood at the window and watched Greyharbor's harbor go to ink. In the glass, he saw his own outline, and, just to one side, the outline that wasn't there. A knitting basket once, a woman's shoulder, a future garden that became a treaty with dandelions. He put his hand flat on the pane until the cold argued him back into his hands. "Ellen," he said, "I'm doing the thing badly that I do best." The room heard him and made no promises. Sleep came like a bus ride, body capitulating, mind counting. He dreamed of a mirror catching a face that wanted to be seen, a bracelet clicking against glass like a metronome for terrible timing. He woke with the image intact enough to pin to cork. Greyharbor breathed. Houses let out heat into the thin march. A gull the color of paper folded itself on the ferry railing and pretended patience. Somewhere men told other men what the fire had done, and somewhere a woman who had once monogrammed a cuff with white thread remained 21, precise and unfinished. Greyharbor's mornings pretended to be clean. Salt glossed the curbs. Gulls worked a paper bag like surgeons with no oath, and the harbor wore a color catalogs would call steel to move inventory. Tom Mallory let the kettle work, while the old desktop woke like a stubborn witness. The inbox finally offered what he'd asked for at midnight: municipal scans from 1982, 1984, permits, inspections, and the city's peculiar poetry of approvals. On paper, the Mariner upgraded panels, rerouted ducts, and temporarily installed coin-op coat facilities 5 weeks before New Year's Eve. On paper, air behaved, wires obeyed, and signatures leaned toward responsibility. He spread the printouts into piles, things that actually happened: voltages, serial numbers, a replaced West Side panel, things that were declared, temporary this, emergency that, and things that were decorative, signatures that looked like flourishes more than names. A fourth pile formed on its own. Not yet. 2 initials repeated on inspections: J.A., Jasper Ames. On one page, the J leaned instead of drooped. He circled it lightly with a pencil, because circling a thing is a way to tell your brain you intend to return. He dressed for walking rather than grace. The day asked for visits. First, the assistant manager who loved mirrors. Then the electrician whose stamp had learned a new slant. Then, whoever sold coin slots to men who thought quarters were a business model. Evan Rusk lived in a condo that pretended to be a ship. Shiplap, where drywall would have sufficed. A porthole mirror, where a square would have told the truth. He opened the door on the second buzz, wearing a gym sweatshirt and a bracelet that wasn't medical. Age had added jaw and subtracted subtlety. His eyes did the quick scan of a man who wanted to borrow the other person's reaction. "Tom Mallory," he said, like naming a cocktail he used to favor. "You're supposed to be done." "Consider this a courtesy call," Mallory said, and stepped inside without touching the doorframe, an old habit from years of not leaving prints in rooms that didn't deserve them. Harbor light made itself at home on the polished floor. A varnished plank on a sideboard held 6 empty glasses, arranged like an invitation to be someone else. Mallory kept his hands in his coat pockets, not out of fear, but because some men collect fingerprints as trophies. "You've heard," he said. "Wharf Street?" Rusk made indifference do a small trick. Old wood and modern wiring. Tragic, symbolic, insured. A welded locker turned up, Mallory said. Inside, a jacket with LC stitched into the cuff, a Polaroid labeled NYE 83, Ferry tokens, lipstick, a single brass key-filed square. You were assistant manager. Why did your room keep a time capsule behind a wall? Rusk smiled the smile mirrors Teacham used, sympathetic, strategically empty. Tom, your case refuses to let you retire. It keeps writing you into Greyharbor. That's almost romantic. You'll get romance when we get signatures, Mallory said. Who installed the coin-op coat lockers? A vending outfit out of Lynn, Rusk said promptly. Maritime vending, I think. Polos, invoices to a P.O. box, the disappearing act that keeps the service economy alive. Who welded a locker into a void? Who says it was welded? Rusk asked. Fire does strange things to metal. Ask an expert. Fire destroys, Mallory said. Intention hides. He let his gaze drop to the bracelet. Flat band, notched, throwing cold light back at the room. Where were you at 12:41 a.m., January 1st, 1984? On a microphone counting backwards, while the room lied to itself about beginnings, Rusk said. You interviewed me then. Assistant managers keep the bar wet, the band obedient, the cameras entertained. In the bar's mirror, a man looks at the camera, Mallory said. He knows the lens. He wants it. Cameras loved me, Rusk said. Or maybe I loved them. Is self-regard a charge now? Mallory let silence do his work. People confide to seal gaps. Rusk had lived with mirrors too long to fear them. Do you remember Lydia Crane? Mallory asked. Accountant-to-be with a white-pipe jacket, Rusk said. Good laugh, careful posture. A club night was an event for her, not a routine. She danced like she was balancing assets. She left in a red hatchback, Mallory said. Or never left, depending on who you wanted to please. Witnesses at 2 a.m. on New Year's Eve are unreliable narrators, Rusk said. Your case is a boat built out of confetti. Don't blame me for the materials. No, Mallory said. You chose mirrors and quarters. We'll see where that floats. He left before Rusk could decide whether offense would serve him. In the hall, he wrote Lynn Maritime Vending on his palm with a pencil stub, because ink forgives nerves. Outside, wind off the water did the cruel kindness of clearing thought. Jasper Ames's office sat above a bait shop that sold regret and coffee. Ames, compact as a toolbox, had the permanent squint of a man who'd stared at bright things too long, too near. He looked at Mallory and saw time, not threat. You don't have a clipboard, Ames said. So you're either trouble or nostalgia. They're cousins, Mallory said. He set a photocopy of the leaning J.A. stamp on the counter. This is your stamp. Is it your hand? Ames pinched the page with 2 fingertips, respectful as mechanics are with parts that can bite. My stamp, not my day. I sprained a wrist that winter. My J drooped. This leans cocky. That's a man trying to be me. You weld? Mallory asked. Enough to admit when someone's better, Ames said. If a locker was welded inside a wall with clean internal beads, someone planned heat. You tack and stitch from the dark side to hide the seam. That's not a midnight lark for a club handyman. A kitchen guy who moonlights on boats could. A contractor with keys would. Who brought in coin-op lockers? Mallory asked. Assistant manager's court quarters, Ames said. Owners sign checks and pretend money is clean. Assistants swim the mop water. Rusk, Mallory said. Ames shrugged. Bracelets were a thing then, he added. Soft men wore medical-looking bands to imply injury or charity. The difference between alibi and accessory is intent. Outside, the sky shifted from steel to pewter. Mallory walked the east wall in his head. Access panel, void, weld, curated contents staged like an exhibit. Audience, the man who cannot stop returning. He wrote that phrase because writing is a way to keep thoughts obedient. He cut down to the Silver Gull's address, now a payday lender with frosted glass, pretending to protect privacy while it guarded margins. In his 1984 file, a laundromat receipt carried Sal Piro's number, the old manager. He dialed on reflex and reached a florist. He bought nothing, but he learned one useful truth. The world replaces names without asking permission. Vieira called. Bracelet angle. Rusk hit the ER in December '83 for a wrist cut 3 stitches, temporary band. Photos suggest he wore it to be noticed. The band in the Polaroid looks wider, a kitchen cuff or fashion piece. Also, a Deck 28 work order signed by N. Hollis. East Corridor access panel alignment. Hollis opens, Mallory said. Someone else closes. Exactly, Vera said. We'll bring Hollis in the morning. Do not spook him tonight. Spooking's not my verb anymore, he said, and decided to interpret that loosely. Salmon Court in late afternoon smelled of starch and tide. Hollis's aunt opened on a chain, judged his grammar, then let him sit. He told her about the locker jacket, tokens, lips, key, picture. She listened like women listen to weather forecasts, skeptical, but practical. Nate didn't kill that girl, she said. He's the kind who keeps every bad thing he didn't do so you'll forgive the things he did. He knew the back halls. He liked sparks and hated responsibility. That's not a welder. That's a spectator. Why'd he leave the Mariner? Money got lost and management wanted a face, she said. The ocean calls fools and saints with the same voice. He mistook it for applause. Mallory found Hollis at a salvage yard where cars stacked in careful disarray and old arcade cabinets waited like retired soldiers. Recognition flickered. Hollis didn't pretend otherwise. You retired or immortal? Hollis asked. Neither stuck, Mallory said, taking the doorway chair where men do ill-advised honesty. This about the locker? I never had locker keys, Hollis said. I pushed a broom and watched people pretend songs were absolution. Your print's on the Polaroid sleeve, Mallory said. A fact, not a knife. Your print's on half the city, Hollis said. What's that make you? Unfinished, Mallory said. Walk me through New Year's '83. Hollis leaned back until the chair remembered better days. Confetti in the mops. A man asked if the East Corridor was clear to bring up cases. Tall, brown hair, bracelet like a hospital band but wider. Looked at me like I had a price. Staff? He walked like he owned air, Hollis said. Different license. Coin-op lockers? 2 rows, Hollis said. Quarter in, key out. East Corridor had kitchen access, an old fuse box we kept to look responsible, and a mop closet door you had to mean. You could hide a locker behind the box if you liked secrets, and had a way to make sparks without witnesses. Who liked secrets? The assistant, Hollis said. The kind who checks mirrors to confirm he exists. Tell him I forgot him 15 minutes after I met him. That'll hurt more than court. On the way out, Mallory ran a finger along an arcade coin slot. The squared interior lip felt like a small, exact answer. He imagined Lydia's father at a garage bench, a vise, a file, a squared tip, learning a new geometry. He filed the thought under caution. Familiar narratives masquerade as proof. At dusk, Vera sent photos of the weld, an internal seam too clean for improvisation. We pulled the vendor's P.O. box, she wrote. It forwards to a shell service that serviced 3 bars on the strip and a boatyard. The registrar's contact is dead. Shells prefer tide, Mallory replied, and printed the images anyway. The seam looked like handwriting. Someone's practiced line, curved to hide intention. He taped it on the board beside the Polaroid. Reflection met craft. Between them sat the jacket's cuff monogram thread, uneven, home done, glowing under lab light like a secret that had waited politely. He took the Ferry tokens from evidence when Vera signed a temporary loan. She had decided that cooperation was cheaper than letting him invent it. He set the tokens on his table. 3 circles of obsolete permission. He spun one and watched it wobble. The engraving showed a gull mid-wing. He thought of the red hatchback's decal. You could build a whole case out of birds and be wrong, he told himself, and put the token back. Morning returned with uncompromised light that lied about clarity. Vera called. Hollis is in an interview room. I can keep him friendly if you keep your distance. I'll pace the hall like weather, he said. It wasn't a lie. It was an ambition. From the hallway, through a rectangle of glass, he watched Vera ask questions he had once asked with more impatience. Hollis shrugged in a controlled key. Vera slid a photocopy of the Polaroid. Hollis's eyes went narrow, not at Lydia's braid, but at the mirror. He pointed and said something. Vera wrote it down. Later, she appeared beside Mallory like someone exiting a thought. He says the mirror shows the service window, not the main bar, which means the photographer stood on the kitchen side, she said. He also says the bracelet looks like the protective cuffline cooks wore when they worked the meat slicer before they stopped trusting hands. Kitchen, Mallory said. We chased the floor for years. The wall says look behind. Who worked the slicer New Year's Eve? Roster lists 2 Luis Cortez and Albie Quinn, Vieira said. Cortez moved to Florida in '86. Quinn opened a catering business that folded. Current address, a houseboat 3 coves north. Boats make good mirrors, Mallory said. They reflect without arguing. They found Quinn on a deck that smelled like diesel and lemons. He wore a knit cap and a face that had Greyharbor wore a hard shine the morning the pieces decided to admit they belonged together. Wind drove the harbor's skin into small, disciplined waves, and the gulls seemed to hold their arguments for later. Tom Mallory watched steam climb from the kettle and fade, the way certain ideas do when they've served their purpose. On the bulletin board, the enhanced Polaroid sat beside the weld photos and the staff roster, and the gap between them had the precise shape of a kitchen door. Vieira called early. We've got Albie Quinn on the pier, she said. Houseboat 3 coves north. Says he'll talk as long as nobody talks back. Take me as furniture, Mallory said. Quinn wore a knit cap and the face of a man who had fought weather to a draw for decades. Lemons and diesel scented the deck. He poured coffee into 2 mismatched cups and set one near Mallory as if feeding a cat. New Year's '83, Vieira said. The slicer station. Who worked it? I did, Quinn said. Cortez called in with a car that didn't start, or a wife that didn't stop. Depends which story you want to honor. The slicer was my kingdom that night. Roast beef like velvet, bread like it owed us respect. Protective cuff on the left wrist? Mallory asked. Wide band. Metal guard, Quinn said, tapping his own wrist. You wear it? Or you bleed for art? I banged it on every corner in that kitchen. People thought it was a bracelet, if they were the kind who noticed shine before purpose. Did you see anyone photographing the service window? Vieira asked. Quinn squinted as if the answer lived in a glare. Bartender's girlfriend had a Polaroid. She took shots of everyone who mispronounced Prosecco. Later, someone in a white dress shirt, not kitchen, asked if he could get a snap from the other side, because reflections make the room honest. He said honest like a joke. He had a bracelet too, but leather. Thick, the kind you buy when you want to be young. Rusk, Mallory said without saying it. Quinn shrugged. Assistant manager's own air. They borrow mirrors. He leaned into the service window like it was a microphone. Did you ever see anyone open an access panel in the East Corridor that week? Vieira asked. Maintenance guy. Hollis could open anything if you told him the right story, Quinn said. But the only person I saw in that corridor New Year's night who didn't belong was a man in a cap with a tool bag that wasn't his. People with real tool bags carry weight in their shoulders. He carried weight in his eyes. Looked like a contractor from a distance and a thief up close. Mallory felt the day tilt. What kind of cap? Wool, Navy style, Quinn said. Scar on the ear, little notch. like he caught ice or a knife wrong once. You can't fake that notch. The Polaroid's mirror had shown an earlobe nick. Men carried their scars like signatures. The room rearranged itself obediently. If the man with the notch stood at the service window earlier, then later he could stand in an east corridor. Nobody watched because the room believed in music more than maintenance. Maritime vending ring a bell? Vera asked. Quinn grunted. Ring, no. Bell, yes. Quarter guys who talked about passive income like it was a sacrament. The kind of men who call everything they touch a system. They left Quinn with his lemons and his winter and drove the harbor road until the city agreed to be made of brick again. Vera's phone chimed. Jasper Ames faxed us a note like it was 1989, she said. He found an invoice in a file box marked Tax Receipts. Maritime Vending subbed their weld work to a boatyard tech named Ian Dresser. Dresser got fired in '84 for falsifying hours. Lives out by the fuel tanks. Bracelet? Mallory asked. Arrest photo shows a cuff, she said. Leather, the kind you buy from a street fair. The boatyard slouched along the inlet, stacks of cradled hulls waiting to remember water. Dresser was 50 going on whatever men become when the world insists on making shape without cooperation. He had the notch on the earlobe. He had the self-certainty of a man who thinks the smartest person in the room is the one who plans alone. Old business, he said, looking past Vera at Mallory. I don't answer to ghosts. Answer to permits, Vera said, showing him Ames's photocopy and the maritime invoice. You welded for coin guys in '83, internal seams. You signed for paid hours and delivered none. Internal seams is a compliment, Dresser said, as if nicks were medals. I made ugly buildings keep secrets. That's art. You welded a locker into an east wall, Mallory said. Who told you what the locker would hold? I welded what I was paid to weld, Dresser said. The '80s were a tip jar. You don't ask who put the bills in. Who opened the corridor? Vera asked. And who watched the service window? Dresser's smile was a splinter. Assistant managers always want to see themselves twice. Mallory stepped closer, because proximity sometimes outruns lies. You stood at the service window for a photograph, he said. In the mirror, you looked at the lens because you wanted to see if the city would remember your face in 20 years. Consider that ambition refreshed. Dresser rolled his shoulder, making the leather cuff creak. If I'd welded something into a wall at a club full of witnesses, I'd have done it when music was loud and nobody earned the right to notice. And I'd have put in the locker whatever the man with the bracelet and the mirror said made the story good. Who was that man's name? Vera asked. Names are for invoices, Dresser said. Cash doesn't ask that question. Vera let him watch her write down obstruction on a line that didn't require his permission. Dresser's eyes ticked to Mallory like a man checking for the older law. Mallory gave him nothing but weather. Back at the station, Hollis sat in interview 2 watching the wall clock the way men watch a bus they intend to miss. Vieira brought Mallory into the observation room, the one-way glass making both men into reflections. He says the access panel stuck unless you meant it, she said. He says he meant it on deck 28 to align a hinge, and that later, someone else meant something else. Ask him whether the man with the notch brought the tool bag, Mallory said. Vieira did. Hollis blinked, thought and nodded once, surprised to discover he'd been allowed to remember. By late light, a pattern acquired fingerprints. Maritime Vending contracted Dresser. Dresser welded at the request of a man with taste for mirrors. Hollis prepared the panel. The kitchen station provided the cuff. The photograph immortalized attention disguised as accident. The locker curated a story. Jacket, lipstick, tokens, key objects that could convince anyone who needed convincing that Lydia had passed through a particular corridor in a particular direction. The capsule wasn't built to store evidence. It was built to stage it for later discovery. Why later? Vera asked, watching the board accrue lines. Why hide the thing and then make sure we could find it? Because you only plant a garden if you plan to return, Mallory said. Because absolution ages well when it looks like archaeology. At dusk, a call came from a number Mallory didn't recognize, but a voice he did. Assistant managers, it said, aren't the only ones who look good in mirrors. Evan, Mallory said. You've been visiting my past, Rusk said. Consider visiting my present. There are efficiencies. Come down to the hall, Mallory said. We have chairs. Police chairs don't flatter, Rusk said. Let me offer something better. The Mariner's sister building 2 blocks over. Used to be the Silver Gull's dry storage. They kept the same shortcuts. I can show you how the wall learned its trick. Now? Mallory asked. Now is when absolution works, Rusk said, and hung up with a man's confidence that time is his waiter. Vera didn't like it, which made Mallory like it enough to be careful. We do this my way, she said. You don't touch what you can point to. They met Rusk at a door whose paint remembered better hands. Inside, the hallway preserved its 80s gloss that used to be fashionable, a smell of old lemons, and something sweeter that might have been rot. Rusk walked ahead with the ease of a man who has always believed corridors lead to rooms with his name on them. Here, he said, at a section of wall that echoed when knuckled. Behind this, a void. It happens when you run ducts, and then learn you measured wrong. Contractors create negative space and pray to the god of inspections. And weld, Mallory said. And weld, Rusk agreed, too readily, but not always to hide malice, sometimes to hide bad design. Vera traced the baseboard with a penlight, found the painted overheads of fasteners that shouldn't have been there. She looked up at Mallory and then at Rusk. You called because you wanted to be the man pointing to the trick, she said. Pointing at a trick feels safer than being accused of performing it. Rusk's mouth attempted the old smile and settled for its shadow. Being helpful is a condition we could all learn, he said. Besides, nostalgia sells. Vieira radioed a unit to meet them with a drill and patience. While they waited, Rusk wandered the corridor like a docent. Did you know, he said, to the air more than to them, that the night Lydia Crane disappeared, I broke up a fight in the kitchen? A friend of hers, Dana or Dinah, accused a bartender of stealing a cigarette case. People misplace things in rooms with too many songs. Dana said Lydia would never have left without the case. I told her nobody leaves a life with a thing that's small as a reason. People leave for smaller reasons, Mallory said. They stay for smaller reasons, too. The unit arrived, drilled out the fasteners, pried with protective mats. The panel came off in one exhausted breath of old dust. Inside, a duct shouldered a void. Rusk leaned in with theatrical hesitation. Mallory refused to let the room applaud. See, Rusk said. Not a locker, just the possibility of one. Possibility is an alibi's cousin, Mallory said. Vera shined her light along the interior surfaces. On the far side, a scratched rectangle lighter than its neighbors had the shape of a mounted box removed long ago. In the dust on the sill, a small track marked where something had once slid and then been pulled. She bagged a flake of paint for no good reason other than she believed in reasons arriving later. When they stepped back into the night, Rusk kept up with them like a companion you forget to dismiss. I can help you find Dresser's receipts, he said. People like him keep evidence of being important. You speak his language, Mallory said. I speak mine, Rusk returned. It overlaps with everyone's when money listens. They let him walk away because the city requires its peacocks, and because arresting a man for knowing corridors is only satisfying in fiction. Vieira locked the panel with a temporary bracket and wrote down 3 names that had been on the board so long they were tired of being nouns. Tomorrow, she said, we pull the bartender, the girlfriend with the Polaroid, and Dana, who lost the cigarette case, if Dana exists. Dana exists, Mallory said. She married a man who learned to look at her like she was new to every room and divorced him when he didn't keep the trick. She sells houses now. She remembers Lydia's cuff and nothing about her shoes. You wrote that down once, Vieira said. I write everything down once, he said. Sometimes the city waits 20 years before agreeing. They found Dana Mullen behind a desk that pretended to be mahogany. Real estate had made her posture glossy and her voice steady. When Mallory said Lydia's name, the gloss fell away with a gentleness he respected. She would have monogrammed a cuff, Dana said. She put her initials in cookbooks because she wanted to find herself in rooms where other people lost themselves. The night she disappeared, she came to the club with a coin purse full of tokens because she kept the last ferry rides like charms. I told her to stop counting. She told me counting was how she made meaning hold still. Cigarette case? Vieira asked. My fault, Dana said. I accused the bartender because accusing someone felt like doing something. I found the case in my own coat the next afternoon, lodged in the lining like the truth you refused to pat down. Polaroid? Mallory asked. Dana smiled a real smile at last. Jessie took them, the bartender's girlfriend. Jessie photographs everything that moves, and then the air where things used to be. She had a habit of shooting through mirrors because she said people show you their collars and their hunger when they believe you're photographing the room. Does Jessie still have the camera? Vieira asked. Dana's smile did an old trick and turned into direction. Jessie still has everything, she said. Jessie lived over a bakery that made bread serious in the mornings and mistakes in the afternoons. Her apartment smelled of developer fluid and yeast, a chemistry that made Mallory think of evidence and breakfast in compromising ways. She pulled a plastic tub from under a table and set Polaroids on the bedspread in rows, as if they were shells a tide had curated. New Year's Eve, '83, she said. You want the service window set or the bar mirror set? I didn't know which of me I was being then. Both, Vieira said, and put on gloves made of paper and patience. The service window set showed hands passing plates, flashes of smiles, the metal cuff banging the sill. One frame caught a white shirt leaning in, leather bracelet visible, a face that could be either Dresser out of costume or Rusk out of role. The bar mirror set again showed the man turned toward the lens, earlobe nick sharp as a signature. Jessie squinted at it. That guy always wanted to be the subject, she said. He looked at mirrors like they'd give him a promotion. Did you ever shoot the East Corridor? Mallory asked. Jessie pursed her mouth. I did once because Dana said the word locker like it meant something. There was a panel hanging wrong and a boot print on the plaster like someone had convinced the wall it was a door. She found the photo and handed it over. In the flash, a scuffed square showed where paint had warmed around a mounted box. The boot print belonged to a man with a heel worn outside. Mallory looked at Vera and said nothing, because saying anything would reduce gratitude to procedure. Back at the board, the narrative stopped resisting. Dresser welded under Maritime's umbrella. Rusk arranged the installation and the drama. Hollis opened the panel on the 28th, aligning a hinge and giving access to someone who wanted it. The chef's cuff provided the misdirection for the mirror. Jessie's mirror shot captured the attention seeker in his natural habitat. The locker, a different one than the sister building's void, got sealed into the east wall at the Mariner, with a curated collection to be found not by chance, but by necessity, when a future fire forced a demolition crew to bite into the exact section an old inspection had declared harmless. Who planted the time capsule? Vieira asked. Dresser welded. Rusk curated. But who gathered Lydia's things? The jacket's monogram was home done. Mallory stared at the cuff photo until the white thread glowed in his memory like a fuse. Lydia, he said. In November, she monogrammed the cuff because she monogrammed order into everything. The jacket was real. The lipstick was hers. The tokens were hers. The key-filed square could have been hers. The capsule maker didn't fabricate her. He rearranged her. They leaned the theory against the only thing that matters: room and time. The night of Deck 31, Lydia danced, counted the midnight numbers, and, at 12:41, stood within a Polaroid's honest accident near the service window. After, she moved along the east corridor toward the coat room, where coin-op lockers turned quarters into a pretense of safety. Somewhere between the service window and the lockers, a man with a bracelet and a borrowed tool bag opened a panel someone else had kindly aligned. He didn't need to murder. He needed to move. A jacket, a coin purse, a lipstick, a key. He performed a theft of identity and a planting of narrative. Later, perhaps hours, perhaps days, when the room's smell had calmed, Dresser welded a steel locker into the void, and inside it, items waited for a future that would need a story. If Lydia vanished because she left with someone, the planted capsule would say she left differently. If she vanished because the city lost her, the capsule would say the city could find her again, at least on paper. "What about Lydia herself?" Vieira asked softly. Mallory felt the question like a weight he had been lifting since 1983. "The Ferry tokens are the tell," he said. "She counted last rides. Someone who knew that habit used it. If she left the Mariner with a man in a red hatchback, he could drive her to the ferry landing for the ritual she believed in. The last ferry after midnight on New Year's was canceled that year for weather. The landing would be empty, the plaque not yet minted. A man could offer to walk her to the end of the pier so she could see the schedule sign and promise herself the first morning ride. Wind, wet planks, a slip, an arm too slow, or a hand not offered fast enough. The harbor took people then without keeping receipts. An accident, Vera said, not quite a question. A negligence, Mallory said, and a man who preferred a future where the city found a neat capsule instead of an ugly absence. He buries shame in steel and calls it a story. They needed proof a court could eat. Jesse's corridor photo offered the boot print. Dresser's police photo from '84 showed a shoe with the outside heel worn to a slanted bite. Forensic played the quiet, unromantic music of measurement. The pattern matched within the comfort of science. Ames's testimony put Dresser in position to weld. Maritime's shell games explained the paperwork. Hollis's work order placed the hinge alignment days before. Quinn's account gave the cuff context. Rusk's role hung between curatorial enthusiasm and criminal conspiracy, a line the law loves to argue about. In the end, they took what they could hold. Vieira signed warrants. Dresser was the first door. He opened it like a man who believed locks were a courtesy. In his shop, above a bench scarred by heat, hung a photograph of a weld bead that had no reason to exist, except pride. He watched the cuffs go on and performed contempt, then sorrow, then a version of relief. "I welded a box," he said. "I didn't kill a girl." "You welded a story," Vera said. "You stole her after the fact." Rusk came to the station in a blazer that tried too hard to talk about restraint. He asked to see a lawyer and then asked to see a mirror. In an interview room, he discovered the glass didn't flatter. He spoke about maritime, about assistant managers needing to extract dollars from habits, about the '80s, as if they were a legal defense. He shook his head at the idea of murder and called the locker branding. He said the word curation 3 times like his tongue was a business card. "You curated grief," Mallory said through the glass, quieter than anger and louder than pity. The charge sheet decided on conspiracy to obstruct, tampering with evidence, accessory after the fact. The law prefers nouns to adjectives. A prosecutor could build a ladder out of the available rungs. The top of it would not reach 1983's dark water, but ladders rarely do. Hollis walked out of the interview room lighter than he'd walked in. He had wanted to be asked the right question, and finally had been. He said he would stop visiting Salmon Court on Sundays and watching football like confession. "I'll watch it like inventory," he said. "See what's missing and name it." Jesse sold prints to a newspaper that still paid for truth with money. Quinn went back to the slicer he had replaced with hands, cutting limes in his head. He said the cuff had saved 2 of his fingers and some part of his respect. Dana stood by a plaque at the ferry landing, a plaque the city had finally, belatedly agreed to add beneath the one about the last token. This one about the first ferry, dedicated to all who waited and to one who didn't get to ride. She touched the metal and said Lydia's name like a ceremony that had been overdue by 2 decades. Greyharbor did what cities do, absorbed a new story into old brick, and went on selling chowder to families who liked the idea of weather. The Mariner's site turned into a development proposal, and then a community garden, and then a parking lot, where light puddled in the wrong places. The locker, catalogued and sealed, became an exhibit in a small room at the station, where rookies go to learn about narrative's temptations. It looked smaller there, under fluorescent truth. Mallory stood in that room on a Tuesday that could have been any Tuesday. He looked at the jacket's cuff and the thread that had drawn straight until it couldn't. He looked at the tokens and saw not currency but ritual. He looked at the key and accepted that it might always be his favorite unsolved shard square filed intention, pointing at a machine no longer alive. He did not take comfort, exactly. He took conclusion, which is a colder thing that nevertheless allows rest. At home, the board over the spare room wall looked less like a wound. He pulled the Polaroid down last and left a clean rectangle where light had been starved. He folded the timeline. He put Lydia's file back in the kitchen drawer, where other people might keep forks. He said Ellen's name into the room, and the room didn't echo, because some names do not need to be returned to the speaker to be true. He carried a paper bag up Crescent Hill Lemons from a vendor who miscounted on purpose, and bread that would admit its mistakes by afternoon. He passed the Silver Gull's old door, now a payday place that made a different kind of ledger. He passed the ferry landing, where the new plaque caught sun and made it do a small thing that mattered. He touched the bronze with 2 fingers, because ceremony has to live somewhere. On the duplex's stoop, he paused. Retirement had felt like exile, until the city reminded him that exile requires a country. Greyharbor would never be anyone's country in the permanent sense. It was a tide. But it did this one good thing when asked correctly. It returned what it could, and admitted what it couldn't. He unlocked the door and let the house accept him without comment. Vera came by on Friday with paper cups, and the kind of smile the job doesn't often afford. Dresser pled on the weld and the obstruction, she said. Rusk will stand up in a room and make language try to save him. We'll see how much the court likes mirrors. Mirrors never apologize, Mallory said. People sometimes do. She glanced at the bulletin board and saw what he had already done to it. You're finished, she said. I am, he said, feeling the sentence locate its weight in his chest. Not the city, just me. They drank coffee like civilians and talked about the weather in a city that understood such talk as biography. When she left, she took the copy of the corridor photo to hang over her desk. He kept the Polaroid in its sleeve in the drawer, not because he needed it for proof, but because some images teach you how to look at rooms. The man in the mirror would always be the kind of man who looked anywhere a lens promised him a future. That was no longer Mallory's weather to measure. On Sunday, he took a small wooden boat from the windowsill, the one he had whittled the winter after Ellen died, and set it afloat in a basin he'd meant to fill with violets and never had. It rocked, found a balance, and pointed itself toward a corner where light gathered. He sat at the table and didn't open a file. He let the house be a house, and the city be a city, and the past be a place that still talked, but no longer demanded a reply. On the dock, in a photograph someone else took, a gull arrested mid-wing learned to pretend it was the Ferry's emblem again. On the plaque, a name that had taken 20 years to find metal learned how to hold weather. On Crescent Hill, a man who no longer carried a badge learned to carry stillness. That was not justice exactly. It was what Greyharbor had on offer, and today it was enough.